Today, listeners, I'm really excited to welcome Ryan Begelman to the show. Ryan is the co-founder of Summit Series and the former CEO and co-owner of Bisnow Media. In 2008, Ryan bought into Bisnow Media, became CEO, and bootstrapped it with its founders Mark and Elliott from $1 million to $20 million in revenue and $7 million in annual profit. In 2016, he led the sale of Bisnow to a private equity firm for $50 million, and today Bisnow is the largest producer of commercial real estate news, conferences, and webinars. Bisnow now has 80 employees operating in 28 metro markets and hosts over 300 annual conferences, attracting more than 70,000 attendees. So I first learned about Ryan when I read Steven Kotler's book, Stealing Fire. And in the book, they tell the story of three young guys that want to rub shoulders with giants and how they got there. Ryan and his buddies came up with an idea to host a ski trip for some of the world's top entrepreneurs and thought leaders. 19 people showed up and thus started what is now called Summit Series. Summit Series began as an event series with a mission to unite world leaders through events designed to catalyze positive personal and collective growth. They gather leaders and feature icons like Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Jessica Alba, and Al Gore. I thought that idea was really creative and smart, but then as I learned the next part of the story, I thought it was one of the boldest, smartest, most genius moves I'd ever heard of. After creating Summit, Ryan and his friends decided they wanted to take their community building to the next level and buy a mountain. Yeah, you heard me right. Buy a mountain where thought leaders and entrepreneurs could live, work, visit, enjoy. So they acquired America's largest ski resort for $40 million, Powder Mountain, where they created an actual town of entrepreneurs and successful people that go to the mountain for conferences, vacation, visiting, and living. Currently, to date, they've sold over 160 million in home sites. So Ryan's going to hop on the show with us in just a second. Before we dive into it, I wanted to mention where you could find Ryan at. You can subscribe to his website blog at ryanbegelman.com, and he occasionally sends out insights to everybody. You can email companies that have over 300,000 or more in profit. He's interested in investing or buying some of those, and follow him on Twitter. And without further ado, let's welcome Ryan to the show. How you doing, Ryan?
I'm great, thanks. How you doing?
Good, man. Did I get everything right in that intro?
Yeah, you did a great job.
Okay, cool, cool. So, like to start this off, this premise, I was on this island in Croatia with these bunch of cool entrepreneurs, and I think the Baby Bathwater Organization, or probably have came across those guys. And a guy was speaking there called Jamie Wheel, who I'd never heard of, and he did this presentation. It was absolutely fascinating on biohacking and mindset and all the crazy things that Jamie gets up to, flow states. And he talked about his book, Stealing Fire. And afterwards, I thought, man, I've got to get that book. I've got to check it out. He's the co-author with Steven Kotler of Stealing Fire. And so I read it, and this was 2018. This was one of my favorite books of the year for sure that I read. Top book of the year, I think. And they started telling the story of you guys, how you wanted to and you can confirm like all the details, and like we'll dive into it, but wanted to rub shoulders with giants and hang out with top entrepreneurs. Started this idea for a ski trip where they came, and then you kind of turned that idea into Summit Series, and eventually then raised $40 million to buy a mountain so you all could hang out and have a good time. And is that is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. I mean, the one thing I'll say is I wouldn't call it raised 40 million in a sense. We pre-sold lots
Oh yeah.
to buy the mountain, and I only mentioned the distinction because I love to spread the word that people don't need to raise lots of capital necessarily. They can pre-sell things and thereby bootstrap and live better lives by not being under the stress of growth metrics and venture capital and things of that nature. But yeah, otherwise, you're absolutely right. That's kind of the genesis of Summit.
I think that's one of the boldest, coolest community building stories that I've heard, because I've been I have a small community of entrepreneurs that follow me and I'm involved in some other entrepreneurial groups. And I'm fascinated. Like one group that I'm a part of started out as just masterminds in the Philippines when they were backpacking nomads with laptops and making $1,000 a month, right? And now it's one of the largest location independent groups of entrepreneurs that are out there. And that's the Tropical MBA Dynamite Circle for you guys that want to know. And and then Baby Bathwater is another organization that just kind of, I think they kind of like we're like, hey, we've got this mountain we hang out on. We want to create an organization of entrepreneurs that can come out and hang on Powder Mountain as well. And then we interviewed Vern Harnish. I interviewed Vern Harnish a few months ago, and same thing, as a guy from a small town. I think he was in Topeka, and he just wanted to create an organization of young, awesome entrepreneurs. Now he runs EO, and is one of the largest organizations out there. But like the essence of community building, especially for entrepreneurs, it's just like it's for me. It's such an exciting thing, and a lot of people don't understand it but they do appreciate it. I think. Like, would you say at the heart of some people are natural born community builders. I want to ask you, would you say at the heart of like who you are, do you feel like you're a community builder? Is it something that you kind of fell into?
No, I would say, I mean, in some sense I am, but frankly, I'm like, I find it awkward going to, at times, like going to dinner parties and even going to my own events and hosting. I sometimes will dread it
Uh-huh.
leading up to the moment that I get there. And then I have a great time. And like, I guess I'm a little like my dad like that. But no, I'm not like a gregarious, like social building sort of person. Now, my co-founders in some sense are a little more of that, um, but I am extremely curious, and so I love meeting people and asking them how they do what they do, and sharing and learning from others. And so I think that definitely helped, inspire us a bit. And I love just building things and optimizing businesses. And so I guess there's some strengths I have around this, but no, I wouldn't say I'm a natural community builder.
I want to start kind of let's start off and touch on Bisnow Media and how you guys built that up, but then we'll dive like into more of the nuts and bolts of Summit Series. What's generally your background? You were in investment banking, right? And then you decided to invest and buy into Bisnow. Were you friends with the founders of Bisnow before?
No, so I went the banking, then private equity route, worked at the Carlyle Group, and then while I was there, they're a big private equity firm. I
Hmm.
was reaching out to lots of a variety of companies to try to acquire a company, leave my day job at Carlyle, get to a place where I could make at least $6,000 a month, so that I could, kind of liberate myself from working in private equity and go down the entrepreneurial path. This is back in 2007. I cold outreach to Bisnow, which was this like newsletter to the founders of it, and
Uh-huh.
asked them if they would sell it to me. Ultimately, became friendly with them, started kind of helping them for free with the business a little bit, and then we had this idea that maybe I could build Bisnow outside of DC. So like they were in DC, they had a newsletter, and
Uh-huh.
I would essentially kind of like start a new entity with the son of the founder, with this guy Elliott, became my co-founder, and we would launch Bisnow into New York and Chicago and eventually 28 metro markets. And
Hmm.
each metro market would have a daily newsletter, an email newsletter, all about business news. And we eventually ended up making it more and more about commercial real estate news. And eventually, we would also produce conferences, sell advertising, sell tickets to events. That's how we would make money. And so I essentially bought kind of the rights to the business, or a big portion of the rights to the business outside of Washington D.C.
Okay, nice. So where was your family entrepreneurial growing up? Because I mean, you look pretty young, man. You look like your resume sounds like you have 50 years of experience in entrepreneurship, right? But you've done some pretty amazing things. Like, where did you get the mind for an entrepreneur? Is this something you grew up with?
Yeah, I definitely owe credit to my parents, and the environment I grew up in. My parents were my dad had kind of had a series of small businesses. My
Uh-huh.
parents were pretty argumentative growing up, and which was actually to my benefit because they would come home and argue about the business, and
Uh-huh.
I would basically be listening at the kitchen table to like the nuances of leases that my dad was working on, or he owned some pizza, like a chain of pizza stores, and so I basically learned kind of business through watching them, and then started reading all kinds of books and kind of as early as middle school on all the billionaires and Wall Street and that
Oh,
kind of thing,
wow. Yeah.
and started a bunch of little businesses when I was young. So that's kind of was the seed for thinking about being an entrepreneur, I suppose, early on.
Yeah, very cool. And then were you directed in a route of investment banking, or is this something that you chose on your own?
I basically wanted to save enough money to start a business and learn as skills as rapidly as possible. I was kind of in a rush to
Okay.
get going, and so the fastest path I could imagine or that I'd heard of was iBanking and strategy consulting, and I decided iBanking was better for me. And I, despite the fact that I'm actually not as strong quantitatively in some ways as I am verbally, decided like I would learn how to do Excel modeling and finance and accounting. And I was a history major, but I basically made it my mission to get internships at all these investment banks during school, and then eventually got a job offer to go work for one. Backpacked around the world for a bit, came back, took my full-time job at Deutsche Bank, and then leveraged that to get into the Carlyle Group, work in private equity, and then started my entrepreneurial path from there.
Very cool. And what was it about Bisnow that made you want to buy into it? What were they doing? Were they doing anything different that just appealed to you that made them stand out?
Yeah, I think like one lesson I learned is like, you can make money on your hobbies, and like look at like the things that you're like passionate about, because you're probably becoming an expert in these little niches. And so I was just reading a lot about real estate news, working at Carlisle, thinking about starting a real estate company, and one of the sources of news was Bisnow.
Hmm.
And so I just loved the nature of the newsletter. It was written by the founder, Mark Bisnow. He was just absolutely brilliant journalist and an entrepreneur. And so I was just reading his newsletter, and then outreach to them to see if they would sell it to me or do something with me.
Yeah. And they were open to it. Like when you reached out to them, they were like, "Hey, let's have a conversation."
No,
No.
no, they didn't want to sell me the business. They were excited about the business, as they should have been, and but they decided that they really wanted to focus on DC. They wanted to do more business verticals in DC,
Uh-huh.
and so that's where the idea came. Where like, okay, well, what if I did it in other geographies? Which kind of taught me that. Sorry, one sec.
Yeah.
Kind of taught me that you can if a deal doesn't work the first time, you just need to be creative and go back and find another way.
Yeah. And that's probably where we'll probably talk, or we might touch on um, using creativity to find different solutions for not only business models, but also, life models and lifestyle models, right? To not stay in one mindset and accept that as dogma, to always be questioning things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a
Yeah.
big part of my methodology for sure.
Very cool. So you guys sold Biz Now, and then so the partners from Biz Now, is that the same partners for Summit, or I think they're different, right?
Well, Mark Bisnow is the original founder of Bisnow, and he was not a partner in Summit, although he's been super helpful with Summit.
Okay.
But his son Elliott and I were basically partners in both Summit and Bisnow, and had this strategy of building kind of like a conglomeration of businesses that we would each have interests in. So I
Mhm.
would, spend a lot of time on Summit in the first 3-4 years, and then Elliott spent more and more time on that day to day, and I really ran Bisnow as CEO day to day. But we
Okay.
both worked a lot on both ventures, and eventually, of course, Powder Mountain, and we started a venture fund with some other in a joint venture, and did a variety of other things.
When did the initial idea so before even the idea of Summit came up, right? You guys were thinking, hey, where'd the idea to invite a bunch of people, thought leaders and entrepreneurs, to a mountain to go skiing come from?
We were working on Bisnow and didn't know what the hell we were doing, and we wanted to meet a lot of other entrepreneurs who we thought knew more than we did, and
Uh-huh.
so it was really Elliott's idea to start cold calling them and inviting them on a ski trip, which wasn't really intended to be a business. It was a free ski trip. We would pay for even their flights. We just wanted to get people together and pick their brain.
Uh-huh.
And so we gathered 19 people, or really Elliott really kicked it off. He gathered 19 people for the first summit, which
Uh-huh.
was in Alta, Utah, and just rented a ski house and hosted these people, and they loved it and liked kind of the unstructured nature of it. And then that led to the second summit and the third and the fourth and so on, and it kind of just grew bit by bit. And there was some kind of like critical kind of tipping points along the way.
Who can you say any of the names that you guys invited to the first summit or the first event?
Well, we invited all kinds of people who rejected us or never took our phone call. You know, Zuckerberg, the founders of, Guitar Hero and all kinds of stuff, YouTube. But ultimately, let's see, some of the initial people were Blake Mykowski, the founder of Tom's Shoes,
Nice.
Tony Hsieh, the founder or the head of Zappos,
Mhm.
which sold to Amazon, and yeah, it was an amazing group of people. We had the co-founders of College Humor and Vimeo,
Mhm.
um, Josh Abramson and Ricky Van Veen, and so they kind of came and helped seed the idea for making this more of a true community that would be ongoing now for more than 12 years.
So you said that that event was unstructured. What did you guys, and of course you went skiing, but what else did you guys like just have chats in the evening time or meet up for lunch or what did you guys
Yeah,
do?
I mean it was pretty disorganized, and as was even the second one, and to some extent the third. Like we didn't even realize until just like days leading up to the second one. The second one was in Mexico. We
Uh-huh.
realized, oh, what if we had some of the people who are attending speak? Like we had no speakers initially. There was no concept of like organized discussion or an agenda. We
Uh-huh.
didn't even know until a sponsor liquor company asked us for a run a show what the hell a run a show is, which is basically like a detailed agenda or schedule. I
Okay.
never heard the term
I actually
for the
never heard
first
it either. Yeah. Until
yeah,
now,
like
yeah.
now if you come to Summit and there's like 4,000 people and we've got 700 staff and there's like an extremely detailed run a show
Yeah.
of like, then this person's going to enter stage left and then the marching band's going to come out and then the violinist is going to do this thing and then the fireworks go off. It's like, now it's like much more of like a true production, and we learned so much along the way. But initially, yeah, it was just hey, we'll get a bunch of people together, like, and we'll have dinners and lunches and we'll go skiing. And, the second one was in Mexico. At the last minute, we had Scott Harrison from Charity Water speak about,
Oh yeah.
social entrepreneurship and double bottom line businesses. And we had Blake Mykowski actually speak about how he was building Toms. And we did a shoe drop with him where we went and gave shoes to children in need. And a lot of that just kind of came together in like literally the days leading up to the event. In fact, I didn't even see the hotel until the day before the event when we arrived in
This is the
Mexico.
second event in Mexico.
Our second event, yeah.
Nice. So,
And yeah.
back to the first event, man. What was the initial cost for you guys? Were you guys providing dinners and all the meals too, or everything
Yeah.
included?
Yeah, it was about $25,000, mostly
That's
put
not
down on a
too
credit
bad.
card.
Yeah.
And yeah, we rented a house. And
So
I
you guys
mean,
were all in the same house the whole week, all 19 of you, or 20?
yeah, there were some people staying like off property as well. The house was kind of like a meeting point, and some people stayed there as well.
Okay.
And yeah, we just like rented, hotel rooms in a house and just kind of pieced this together. It wasn't really, like I said, it wasn't particularly well organized.
Right, right. And it was, how many days was it? 5 days?
No, 3 nights
Okay.
and 3 days, and that's kind of been the format of Summit ever since.
Okay.
It's been a few nights and a few days.
And then were you guys, did you guys pitch the idea for having more of these events, like in a paid format at that event, or were you just let them go, and then ran the idea by them
No,
later? How'd that work?
No, we kind of decided together as a group, one night that we would do another event, but it really wasn't particularly well sold or like well. And so we actually didn't sell tickets to the second one. The second one and the first one we paid for was sponsorship. We
Okay.
lost maybe $30,000 on the second one. It was a lot more elaborate and it
Okay.
was bigger. It was 85 attendees, and we probably lost about 30 grand. I think it probably cost about 100 grand to produce in Mexico, and it wasn't until the third one that we said, hey, we sent an email, which was incredibly stupid, and just said, hey, sign up. Here's tickets. It's like $2,200 to come to the third one.
Uh-huh.
The third one was bigger, a lot more expensive because it was in Aspen and there was ski lift tickets included, and more. The lodging was much more expensive, in peak season in a ski resort town than Mexico, and so we decided we would go out of business if we didn't sell tickets. We sold like 30 tickets, and then little did we know that there was like a few people basically saying like, don't buy tickets. These guys are kind of schmucks for charging, because they thought it was like going to be free. Like it was just a bunch of friends. Like, I don't think they really understood. Like we should have been more forthright. Yeah. And instead of being like, we kind of presented it like, hey, it's exclusive. You're kind of like fortunate to get in. There's a limited supply. So we came out with strength when we should have come out with weakness and been like, hey, we don't know what we're doing. This thing costs, we're in over our heads on cost. Uh-huh. And so eventually we did pivot and we're more transparent about that. And then that kind of won back a bunch of people who were like, are these guys profiting off of like, the introductions I made them, which was kind of the vibe some of the people got from our just insensitive email. So there was a lot of lessons learned on that.
So that was the third event, right? So
yeah,
you sent out that email. Okay. What was the timeline between the first event and the second event?
Basically all the initial events are like 4 or 5 months apart.
Okay.
So it was like roughly a little bit more than twice we were at a clip a little bit more than twice a year.
Yeah. And then, okay. So then you've fast forward to the third event, which is in Aspen. How did you, when you sent out that email and realized that some people were kind of upset about it, how did you manage those relationships? Because I imagine they were decent relationships. You took a person to Mexico or, skiing and got some good rapport with them. But when you found out, those people were, maybe a bit upset about it, what did you guys do? Did you do any, anything to maintain those?
Yeah, so honestly, our co-founders, Brett and Jeff, kind of saved the day. They came on board after as we were finishing up the second event. And as we were about to go out of business on the third event, because we sold 30 tickets and then tickets screeched to a grid, they screeched to a halt. Uh-huh. Brett and Jeff got on the phones, flew around and actually met with a lot of people. And, they're super, they're just great human beings and people love them. And they managed to be more honest than I think we had been in our email about our struggles. Uh-huh. And basically get people to realize that we're doing the best we can and that we're losing money, and get people back into the fold. And then when people came to the third one, every time people came to one of our events, they generally loved the event. And so when people came to the third one, it was, very transformative for a lot of people. A lot of people found their co-founders, their investors, close friends. A lot of people, some people fell in love and, got married later. And so, those people spread the good word about the event. And then that third event established that we actually have to charge for tickets. Uh-huh. And so by the time we went into the fourth event, which was in Miami, we had some more momentum behind us, and we had these other two co-founders, really three co-founders, Brett, Jeff, and Jeremy, who came on board and made a huge difference in helping to grow the community.
When did you name it after the first event or the second event where you're like, we're going to call this Summit Series, or when did that come about?
No, the first event was called Summit Series, and had a dinky website, and had me looking, I think by the second event there was a picture of me looking like a total kind of fool, as the chief entertainment officer, giving myself one of those cute Silicon Valley titles. Uh-huh. And then we hosted this event in Miami, and after the Miami event, there was a couple of interesting tipping points. Somebody who had come to our event in Miami had helped run Obama's campaign, and had helped come up with the Hope campaign element of the campaign. And so he ended up becoming a part of the administration. And he said the White House, they had determined for whatever reason that they wanted to meet entrepreneurs. And so as Obama was taking office, some of his senior leadership wanted to meet with young entrepreneurs and extend kind of a bridge between the White House and the entrepreneurial landscape. Mm-hmm. And so they asked Summit if we could put it together, and they only gave us 1 week to do it. And so we decided, okay, we're going to host an event at the White House. And it gave us this awesome excuse to reach out to everyone who had rejected us
Yeah.
and say, hey, you want to come meet like senior leadership in the new White House? And, for what would be a free, kind of just like a one night event. And so we did that. We were nervous that like serious people from the White House wouldn't show up because they kind of kept it kind of like a secret about like who was going to meet with us. And so we started kind of a whisper campaign as best we could around the White House that this really important event was happening with all these major like tech leaders. And we kind of knew a couple of people who knew some people in the White House. We basically got this kind of campaign going internally where people were kind of asking inside the White House, like, how come I wasn't invited to this like meeting? And that eventually helped get some pretty important people that are senior in the White House to take the meeting pretty seriously.
Wow.
And we had a meeting in the executive branch adjacent to the White House. And I think, they had asked us not to post anything on social. And anyway, one of the founders of Twitter came and he posted about it while he was there. And that kind of blew up a little bit. And then somebody from the Clinton Foundation in Harlem heard about it and said, oh, Bill Clinton's foundation wants to also tap into the entrepreneurial world. And this is in like 2009. And in 2009. And so they called us and said, hey, can you do something with, the Clinton, global foundation? And that gave us this really cool excuse once again to like meet all these people in New York who we didn't know. We were living in DC at the time. And so we cold called around, and somebody had heard that Russell Simmons was like newly divorced, and and that he had this like really cool house that was looking over Ground Zero. And we thought that would be kind of cool to host it there. And so we just cold called his office and said, hey, we're looking for Russell Simmons. Does he want to host, Bill Clinton? And, of course, with Bill Clinton on the docket, like they said yes. And so we decided we wanted like a really cool chef to cook the meal. And we heard through the grapevine that Tom Colicchio, who's like this really famous chef, was doing a shoot, like a video shoot at Central Park for some sort of like Food Network show. And so we just went there and found his producer and basically like wedged our way into like, his team and said, hey, do you want to come cook at Russell Simmons' house with President Clinton? And of course, he said yes.
Yeah.
And the meal would have to be vegan because Russell's a Buddhist and a vegan. And so, that gave us this awesome opportunity to invite all kinds of people from like the record industry who we had never known because because of Russell's reputation as like a famous, kind of rap and R&B and hip hop producer and, brand. And then, all kinds of nonprofit leaders who were interested in what Clinton was doing with his huge foundation, and, political people part of the United Nations, in New York that we could invite. And of course, New York's, Silicon Alley entrepreneurs who we didn't really know that well. And this is kind of a theme of like how we built Summit. We would basically move to different cities, host free events, meet the local kind of influential people and up and coming, creatives and artists and athletes and, entrepreneurs and nonprofit leaders, and use these events and like kind of like, co-hosts to help us gain and, entree into really people that are like on the, in the vanguard of wherever that is, and so like another example is we moved to Malibu for 5 months, rented kind of an old house that had like a surf break and like used that house to host a dinner almost every weekend for 5 months, hosting free events, and broke into like, all the people that are like, in and around CAA and television production and movie production and, actors and actresses and creatives. And of course, the entrepreneurs in that world and artists and whatnot. So like that kind of became like a method, kind of a guerrilla tactic to Summit.
Were those free events, were they often dinners, or did you do any other types of free events?
We would do all kinds of stuff, I mean, we basically would do anything that we thought would be fun for ourselves. And then we would just be like, well, why don't we like, we're going to learn how to surf. Why don't we just have a bunch of people over to like to learn how to surf with us? Like we rented a house in Nicaragua for 5 months, and like Tim Ferriss came down to write a book. And then we're like, why don't we invite people to come like learn from Tim Ferriss because he's here, and like he is chill and hangs out at dinner teaching us stuff all the time. We're interested in that. This is, before he was as famous as he is now.
Yeah.
And then, we're learning how to surf while we're down here, and other people will probably want to learn the same. We're learning how to, cook, vegan. Like we'll have other people come down. And so like a lot of our programming were just things that we were naturally curious about. Like if we're learning cooking, if we're learning mindfulness, and we're living with people that are, learning the same or experts on that,
Yeah.
then we'll host people, and those other people will become, kind of like the speakers.
I want to go back to the White House event, and you mentioned that you started a whisper campaign. So you were kind of nervous. You didn't think the big wigs would show up to the event. And what is a whisper campaign, and how did you structure it to get more awesome people to the White House?
I mean, I wish I could say it's as sexy as it sounds. I mean, it was as simple as we knew somebody who was like kind of who was in the White House, and we we basically invited him to come to this meeting. He hadn't heard of the meeting,
Uh-huh.
so then that naturally caused him to ask other people around the office, like, what's this meeting? Why isn't it on the agenda of certain people? And then there was the original guy who I mentioned invited us to produce this event. And then we would kind of back channel to him, like, shouldn't this guy be invited? And and then he introduced us to a couple other people in the White House. And we basically just kept emailing different people that we kind of loosely knew through someone else. Like it kind of spidered
Uh-huh.
eventually, where we were essentially getting emails forwarded from one person to the next, asking, who's invited to this, what's the agenda, what's the purpose, and that just kind of naturally caused a bunch of people to like, kind of want to be invited to this thing that we
Okay.
otherwise like, might not have had come. And eventually, like the chief economist, essentially, like in the cabinet,
Uh-huh.
got caught wind of it, and then he invited like his staff, and like, it just became much more significant meeting.
Wow. And how many people could you bring? Or did you guys bring?
I think that event was like 50, 60 people that
Nice.
we could bring. And yeah, I mean, looking back on it, it was interesting. We had people from both sides of the aisle and all kinds of interesting people that we, just had this awesome excuse to invite.
Yeah. And was that free, or did you guys charge for that event?
No, that was all free. We paid for it. Was, we would do these things kind of thrifty. We'd get like a friend who owns a restaurant that
Hmm.
we met through a friend, to host, like, to cut us, a discount. And, maybe we get like one sponsor, but, we also were willing to just lose small amounts of money on some of this stuff.
Right. So if we go back to the Aspen event, you said you guys lost money on that one, right? And it wasn't until the fourth
No,
event you
actually,
started?
Aspen was losing money when we only had sold the first 30. And then we ended up selling 120 tickets in the end after we kind of
Okay.
got people back on board. And so that one actually made a profit, paid for the losses on the second one, and gave us the cash we needed to start building the third.
Okay.
But the nice thing about events is that they're working capital positive, and I love businesses like these where, you know, you're bringing in money that helps you produce and grow the next one.
Yeah. Do you guys, so as a person that does events, I'm always kind of curious about this. Do you guys, do you balance a chunk? Do you say like, oh, we're gonna invest 15, 20, 50% of the profits from this one into the next event, or do you just take it all over, put 100% into the next event, or what's your guys' model for that?
So Bisnow and Summit have been a bit different. Bisnow, the first 4 years, we took every minute we had, any second we had a profit, I'd go hire more employees,
Okay.
launch a new market, launch new products. And then in years like 5, 6, 7, and 8, we started to be able to take distributions. Our scale got big enough. We were, profiting millions of dollars, and we could live on distributions as partners.
Hmm.
Whereas Summit, we've just always been reinvesting, and Summit has been more of like a little bit more of like a lifestyle business of sorts. Like it's never really been meant to be a vehicle where we would make a lot of money
Okay.
necessarily. I mean, maybe eventually it will be, but it hasn't been today.
And then when you guys started it out, did you know this was going to be like a 10-year project? Something you guys were going to, no, it was just like, hey, this
No,
looks
no, no.
fun.
We
Let's
had
go
we had like
speak.
no foresight whatsoever. Like, I think after like a year, I quit my job and realized that this was serious.
Uh-huh.
This in biz now. Once I got to a place where I could pay myself 6,000 a month, and that was enough for me to live. But I don't think we had any clue. I think our desire was never to sell,
Hmm.
and we still haven't sold, and have no intention of selling Summit. and we bootstrapped everything so we weren't under any pressure, to hit any particular metric or exit or anything. So we had kind of a long-term kind of view without a whole lot of thought about, or it wasn't like we had a 5-year plan or anything.
So you said that number 6,000 a month twice now. I'm just curious, like, where did you come up with that number to say, oh, this is a good number? Because a lot of people say, oh, Ryan's sold a multi-million dollar company, he should get 100,000 a month or something like that. But why do you stick with 6,000 a month?
Well, I mean, I couldn't live on 6,000 a month today, to be honest. I wish I could. I wish that was true. But at that time, I think a lot of people don't really, they don't set their goals appropriately. So, in
Mhm.
my opinion, like I've seen a lot of people just create a lot of anxiety for themselves because they weren't that deliberate about their goals. So they decided, oh, I'm going to raise 10 million just because I got to get to $100 million. They have some kind of magic number. But if they actually thought hard about their expenses and studied them, they'd probably realize that like they're probably never going to need more than like a quarter million to $1 million a year to
Mhm.
live for the rest of their lives. Maybe even less, depending on where you live and what kind of lifestyle you want.
Mhm.
And in order to achieve that can be fairly straightforward. And if you set your goals like lower, frankly, then you can like build a minimum viable kind of like, product and marketplace, as opposed to like, burning lots of cash, losing money for a long time. And often those companies, of course, fail in the end. And so I've always been trying to avoid that sort of methodology that like Silicon Valley startups take, and try to just think about how in 12 to 18 months can I make just enough that I'm paying for my current lifestyle.
Mhm.
And ideally, once I do that, get to a place where I could also afford, maybe children or whatever my future lifestyle involves.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Um, okay, I think I want to come back to that, but we'll keep on the story of Summit. So how many events have you guys done now?
Oh, I mean, we've done hundreds, and I mean, Bisnow was producing 300 conferences a year.
Well, just for Summit.
Um,
Yeah, just for Summit.
for Summit, I mean, we did lots and lots of smaller events, but in terms of like what I would call our flagship events,
Yeah.
we were doing those like basically twice a year
Okay.
for the last 12 years.
And then do you have how many do you have like a community of members or
Yeah, Summit recently launched like more of a formal subscription like community
yeah.
for a portion of the community. But otherwise we don't have like a true membership. I mean, people self-identify
Hmm.
once they've been to a Summit event as summiters, and there's certainly like a culture and like a group, and people self-organize events all the time, and they'll say like, oh, we're having my Summit people over, and we have of course an email list, but I wouldn't say it's like a paid, like we've got X thousands of paid subscribers.
Right. But okay, so how many do you guys have a number of there's been thousands that have come to the flagship events over the years, right?
Yeah, like our biggest event was probably 4,000 tickets.
Oh wow.
um,
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, our events are like anywhere from like, we host weekends out of Powder Mountain that are as small as 150. We do dinners in cities sometimes that are like 50 people, and
Nice.
then we have these flagship events that range from like 500 to like 3,000 some odd attendees.
Okay. So when along the timeline did you guys decide or get the idea of we're gonna buy a mountain?
Well, as I mentioned, we didn't want to live like these traditional lives where we had like normal office space initially.
Mhm.
And so we basically took all the money that we had from that we were paying in office rent in DC at the time in 2008, and the money that our team was paying in our apartment rent. And we collected that and we all lived together, and we moved around and rented houses. And we basically lived like, in Nicaragua, we lived in a houseboat in Amsterdam, we lived in Tel Aviv, we lived all over the world, at like basically renting places for a month to 6 months at a time,
Mhm.
working, hosting events, having fun, trying to find, learnings in each of these places. And so we were kind of living these nomadic lives.
Yeah.
And then this guy, Greg Morrow, came to us and said, hey, I'm a skier, and I have a second home in Powder Mountain, and I know it's up for sale, it's in distress. And that was maybe in 2011. And so we decided we would join venture with him, and we would acquire the mountain, and we would move there, or like move our team, move our company to Eden, Utah, which is basically a rural part of Utah that has this beautiful 10,000 acre ski resort.
Mhm.
And we would buy this, roughly $40 million asset, and invest what ended up being, over $100 million and growing, into infrastructure, build roads, build utilities, find water, build wells,
Wow.
bring internet to the top of this mountain, and build this community in pristine nature where all kinds of creatives could come together and have awesome kinds of programming, talks, music, comedy, wellness, etc., dinners, and own either a primary, secondary home, and eventually have hotels and build a master plan development,
Hmm.
for the kind of underneath the ethos and principles of the Summit community. Yeah, that's so we eventually acquired the land in 2012, went through a whole process of rezoning and master plan, planning this whole thing, architecting it, getting the local community behind it, and approving it of what we were going to do there. It's still open to the public. It's a ski resort. Thousands of people ski there,
Hmm.
and there's restaurants. It's a complex business. There's many components to it.
I could imagine.
Um, so yeah, we became developers, ski operators, community builders, farmers,
Uh-huh.
like you name it. It's there's quite a lot going on out there.
So you mentioned like Greg brought this idea to you guys, but I'm sure there was a lot of discussion beforehand, right? Before you can get to the point where you buy this thing. Um, what were some of those discussions leading up to the decision of wait, oh yeah, we can do this thing? And then maybe if you can describe a little bit like the moment that you all decided this is an actual thing we can do and we're going to do it.
It was very quick.
Was it?
Greg called. There was like a first call. The partners were excited about it. We had a second call. I think actually maybe a meetup with Greg in LA, and we flew. I think literally the next day after meeting with Greg, like last minute flights, flew to Utah, went up to the top of the mountain, looked out at this four-state view. You can see Nevada, Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah from the top of this mountain. Saw the awesomeness of being in nature. We all, we were skiers,
Hmm.
and fell in love with the place and decided, let's do it. Let's see if we can pull this off. We rented a home at the bottom of the mountain. We ended our lease, in California at the
Uh-huh.
time, moved our entire company, our team, haven't bought the mountain yet, to Utah at the bottom of the mountain, living in a lake house all together,
Uh-huh.
playing, pickup sports in the afternoon in this big, lawn in front of our house, making calls to host people out of the mountain, producing events there, building a culinary team, like essentially building a bed and breakfast at the bottom of the mountain,
Hmm.
all the while getting to know the local community, doing diligence on putting the mountain under contract, doing diligence on water, power,
Right.
sewer, the ski resort, who runs it, how does this work, how does we don't know anything about how ski resorts work. We don't know anything about engineering of like how does a there's always things you don't think about, like how does a mom and her kid on a snowboard get from point A to point B safely, into their home? How do you get groceries? Like,
Right.
how do you get Amazon to deliver to your house on top of a mountain that like is barely on Google Maps? Like, there's so much shit to figure out.
Uh-huh.
And and so we basically just were working on all this while hosting events out there,
Right.
and putting together, the financing and everything that goes into pulling this off.
So the idea is like you're gonna pick up this mountain that's distressed anyway, the ski resort, right? And who knows why was it distressed? Do you even know? Like,
Yeah.
they didn't have funding or they're losing money on it or what was happening?
Yeah, the builders before us had planned to build kind of like another Vale, thousands of units, like another like kind of Disney World on, on top of a mountain, which the local community was adverse to,
Okay.
as rightfully so. And they also hit the 2008 recession. So they were having a hard time getting it approved by the local community, their vision, because they had bought the mountain for so much, and they wanted to make so much money that they needed to build a much bigger development than we intend to build.
Yeah.
And they also hit the housing crisis.
Yeah.
And so they were in over their head. And so they ended up losing the mountain to their lenders, and their lenders ended up becoming in distress themselves. And so that created an opportunity. One, because we had no intention or desire to build thousands of units. So we had a concept that I think was more would kind of save the mountain for the local community some respects, and also we were buying it for less money, so we didn't have to build something as aggressive
Hmm.
as they did,
Do you
and
know
we had
what
a
they paid
built-in
for it?
community.
Sorry.
Yeah, they paid I think 150 million for it.
Oh man, so you guys got a deal, big deal on it.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, and then you guys were coming in with the idea of like let's make a community out of this, and basically, if correct me if I'm wrong, but it's like pre-sell it for $1 million a property, right? And try and get to was it 250 people to, or what was your first benchmark?
No, the idea was that we'd build this founding member program where if you would basically we would sell you essentially like a lot. Essentially, you put in $1 million, and once we sell our 250th lot, you'll
Hmm.
get your money back.
Okay.
And so you're helping us put up the money to initially host events, acquire the mountain, market the ski resort to the rest of our community and others, build the initial infrastructure, build the first lodges, renovate existing, ski lifts and things of that nature. And then so many years into the project, once we've sold 250 lots and we're in the black, and we've built some of the critical infrastructure to kind of get the thing off the ground,
Hmm.
then we'll repay those initial homeowners so that they ultimately got their land for free.
Right.
And so that's kind of how we finance the project.
What was
Well,
so
a
you wanted
portion of it anyway.
okay, so you didn't get all 40 up to get the 40
No,
million?
we did get 40 that way, but the mountain,
Okay.
it turns out the mountain costs more than 40 because the infrastructure is very expensive. And so
Yeah.
we also did like a municipal bond backed by the county, and and future taxes and things of that. So there was a variety of other ways that we used debt to finance the project as well.
It's amazing, man. Um, I love this. And then, so who is going to take care of the ski resort? Like, I mean, who's managing that thing? You guys, you're doing the real estate. You got the ideas for the real estate. Was there a team there already that was just going to transfer over to, you take ownership, the team stays there, and the ski resort keeps going as is, or what happened?
Yeah, I mean, it was very challenging, but there was a team in place. We ended up over time kind of evolving, elements of that team. But and there was, we had to build a development team. We had to build a membership company, to basically build a club there for the community that buys them. We had to build a homeowners association, like an architectural design review board. There's so many components to it. We built a hospitality company that we, could host events and weddings and things like that out there.
Mm-hmm.
And we built a brokerage company that could, broker the real estate there, and we would be licensed. And so there was a lot of things to it, but there was an initial managed team operating the ski operation that we kind of evolved over time.
And so as you're building all this stuff, like I mean, what was the team size when you bought the mountain? And then you guys are, I imagine, hiring a bunch more people to start the events business and to start, well, how
I
much?
want to say, I want to say they had like 20 full-time team members. And then in the winter, it's like 250 people seasonally
Oh, for
who
this
work
the
on the pro
resort. Yeah.
who work
Okay.
on the resort. And then the development company has a bunch of, has a lot of people and tons of contractors as well as full-time people. The brokerage company has brokers.
Hmm.
There's restaurants. I mean, there's like a bunch of different kind of like subsidiaries, if you will, to the business, and they
Okay.
all have staff. So I mean, all combined, and then when we host events, there can be hundreds of staff working on the events.
Right.
And then Summit, the events company and brand, is a separate company, and that has about 40 or 50 employees.
Okay.
And then we had Bisnow at the same time, which was about 80 employees.
Wow, man. It sounds like so much that you're managing over. I mean, I know it's not just you managing over, but like there's so many moving parts. And I like, for me as an entrepreneur, I'm always like, how can I reduce? And I think you have this mindset too, but reduce, higher revenue, lowest amount of people we need to run the show as we go and that sort of thing. But, for me, this sounds like I'm not the type of entrepreneur that wants to build a company with 50 and 100 employees, 200 employees. I want, five max and,
Yeah.
a certain revenue that makes me really happy and comfortable with my lifestyle. So I don't know. For me, it seems like it's a hard thing to fathom all these moving parts, buying a mountain with a resort on it, an events company, and a development company, and all this stuff, and Summit Series while you're doing it. Like, what's the balance there for you? Like, how do you not get involved or attached to all those other small moving parts so much that you could easily do?
And I do,
Okay.
I tend to be like, I tend to be very, I love to do as many of the roles as I can. It was built very iteratively. So, I learned each thing as I went, and then I would replace myself. I learned over time that I should always have like two or three people who are apprenticing alongside me anytime I learn anything new. And
Hmm.
this is something I'm always trying to remind myself. Like, I'll start to deep dive into like, hey, how does email marketing work? And I'll get like a weekend, I'll be like, wait a minute, I really shouldn't spend another minute learning about this unless there's like three other people learning this simultaneously,
Okay.
who one or two of which are going to replace me. And then as I replace myself, I move on to the next thing and the next thing. And I'm basically tearing up my job description like every 3 to 6 months.
Hmm.
And, over a period of time, that kind of compounded. And eventually some people emerge as rising stars and they can become, and I built this kind of rotational program too, where I would hire people and say like, look, you're a rising star, you're going to work in marketing, then maybe accounting and sales, or you're going to do event production and then learn the programming. And so that you can be as multidisciplinary as I feel like I am as like a co-founder and CEO,
Hmm.
so that you can take over and be very dynamic entire departments or cross depart or even span departments. And so, I replaced myself with another CEO in Bisnow. I replaced myself with another CEO in Powder Mountain, and at different points, same thing in Summit. And I would hire COOs underneath them, and heads of departments beneath them, and but it was always very bootstrapped. It wasn't like we were just like burning cash to do this. It was kind of methodical. I'm sure we could have grown faster had we like added rocket fuel to the thing with capital, but I
Right.
was a little bit more in your mindset of like wanting to keep my burn low.
Right. I love the idea. I think I heard you talk about it on another interview that and you just mentioned it again, but you have three or four apprentices for each job that you hire, not just one because you don't know if that one can actually do the job. If you hire three or four of them and then train them, you're going to find at least one that can do the job right. Where'd this concept come from? And could you like give us a few examples of you using it?
Yeah, it was just from making the mistake of not doing that initially.
Yeah.
Initially, I would constantly be like, okay, I'm going to go master how to be a head of sales. I have no idea how to be a head of sales. I'm going to read every book. I'm going to go on YouTube, watching tutorials. I'm going to call heads of sales at other companies and ask them to coffee. And 6 months from now, I'm going to be an awesome head of sales. And
Uh-huh.
then I'm going to spend another 6 months actually being the head of sales and like and making sure I, get good at this. And then I'm going to replace, and then it takes, 90 days to do a search or more to find a replacement for myself. And then when that replacement comes on board, you know, 40% of the time, then they're not a good fit for whatever reason.
Right.
Maybe I need to move them into another department at the company. Maybe I need to, let them go. And now I'm like back to searching again. So it would often be like, 2 years before I really replaced myself in
Mm.
a new thing that I was pursuing. So I learned that, and then I started doing it with just like, I'll have one person apprentice, but then half the time they're not the right person. Or they look like they're doing a great job initially because they're really good at the research part and the learning part, but they're not really good at like, and they're maybe even good at project management, but they're not good at human resource management because they can't get along with people or motivate people. And it's just, I just learned like humans are full of flaws and, challenges, and, like they're not all going to be great at like six things. They're mostly, a lot of them are going to be good at only one or two things.
Right.
And so if I hire like three or four people to apprentice, like one of them is going to be dynamic enough to really take over. They might have some weaknesses in a few spots where I can support them or get someone else to support them, or I just need to be, chill about the fact that they're going to do this job 70% as well as I'd like it to be done. And that's fine because that gives me enough. It's good enough so that I can move on and get
Mm.
into the next thing where there's like a higher yield on my time.
That
And
makes
so,
sense.
yeah, that's kind of how I just evolved into this.
What's a good salary to pay an apprentice? Like if you've got four of them going on, you pay them like each couple thousand a month, or 3,000. What's the bar for you? And how long do you keep them around until you decide, okay, we're gonna move you on to? fully
I
fully
mean, in the
postponed?
early days, it was a recession and I could hire people for less. And it was also,
Yeah.
I was like so in the weeds that I could like actually do so much of the role that I could kind of persuade people to join me and just learn from me and take less. But as we evolved, I got a little harder to do. So,
Yeah.
I'd hire like people from top 50 universities often who I thought were really smart, hungry, who didn't really know much about the role. And were either right out of college or a few years out of college. And I'd pay them anywhere from like 60 to 90 grand a year, typically at the start.
Okay.
Um, and then over time, they would start to make six figures eventually,
Okay.
if they were good, and in some cases would make a lot, quite a lot. But it just kind of depended on the role, and it's different departments have like different demand. Like
Sure.
writers don't make as much as salespeople,
Yeah.
unfortunately. So like I'd pay writers a different amount than a salesperson, perhaps.
Yeah. So you were paying like all three or four of those 60 to 90 grand a year, and then whenever you decided they needed to go somewhere else or they shouldn't stay along, then you just let them go, and then you elevated the main person. Is that kind of what it?
Yeah, and in some cases, I would, well, if some of the people wouldn't work out, but I would then put them into another role where we had, because we were growing. And this is one nice thing about having kind of a conglomerate of businesses too, is you could take people who aren't like a great fit for BizNow and put them into Summit or vice versa, and you always have like a home for them if they're good. I
Nice.
find if someone's really great, like I hate to let them go. So, and then you'd cut the people that just obviously weren't a fit or just wasn't exciting for them or what have you.
Yeah. A couple questions on Summit, and then we'll move over to mental fitness stuff. But what's been the most fulfilling aspect of creating an organization like Summit?
It's been a skeleton key. I can call anybody on the planet, and because of Summit, I can generally get them on the phone, which is something I honestly think I was good at doing before Summit. And I always tell people that you just got to pick up the phone because amazingly people will most often take your call,
Hmm.
especially if you try them on like every channel. Yeah, but Summit's been this awesome skeleton key, and I've just learned so much from getting to meet so many luminaries in so many fields. And what's so cool about Summit is it's so broad. Like BizNow is like in a niche. Summit is like it's for artists, it's for academics. We literally have astronauts
Yeah.
come to Summit. So it's like, if I want to know about what's it like to ski Everest, like, Jimmy Chin is like part of the community, and like go have like lunch with him and ask him that, what was that like, when you
Yeah.
got stuck in an avalanche and you barely survived, like, and like, so it's just amazing the kinds of people that I've had an opportunity to meet through this vehicle.
So, first person that comes to your mind, who's the most impressive person you've met through Summit Series?
Oh man, I mean, I I really, I mean, I love like Tim Urban from Wait But Why, who's like this awesome blogger.
Hmm.
I just think his mind is absolutely genius. The way he thinks about things is so unique. Um, I really admire and look up to like the people who have like really like mastered mental, fitness and mindfulness. And so, the Buddhist monks that have come through Summit, the people who master breath work, like Wim Hof,
Hmm.
um, and others along those lines, I've always been fascinated by people like that, the people who study neuroscience and the brain and cognitive behavioral therapy. I mean, a major source of knowledge and wisdom has been Esther Perel, who's like a famous relationship psychologist. And,
Hmm.
she's had a profound impact on my 12-year, marital relationship with my wife, just learning from her. So, a lot of the more like people who did research and were academics, I find so fascinating. I know, of course, some of the entrepreneurs are really cool and interesting what they've done. Laird Hamilton, is a famous, surfer. Just like the lifestyle, people who architect life in a really creative way, people who live artistically.
Yeah.
Like Laird has people over his house every weekend, or I think every day in the morning to like do breath work and jump in the ocean and cold plunge, and like
Yeah.
he's built like a really interesting life. There's this artist, Peter Tunney, who he himself is the art. Like, yeah, he sells paintings, but like the interesting thing about him is the way he sells his paintings for a lot is in part through his own ability to create story and to live an interesting life. And people are drawn to him. And he's just such a sincere, authentic, like creative person. Everywhere he goes, you know, he does something that brings like brilliance and creativity. He like creates Burning Man wherever he is. So like, you know, if he shows up at Summit, he doesn't just show up at Summit. He brings like, you know, an RV and paints it and turns the interior into like a magic, you know, room where he's doing magic and people are popping in. I'm like, no one asked him to bring the RV. He just like showed up, you know, he paid for a ticket and he showed up like everyone else, but he like rented an old Airstream and painted it with like, you know, the word gratitude on the outside. And like, you know, buried little messages of gratitude around it that you can discover, and just does magic in there all day. I'm like, before you know it, there's like, you know, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk are in there, like, you know, just because they were curious and like they're debating, you know, the future of space travel or something, you know, and like Peter's just in the middle. And like Peter didn't like, he wasn't like, you know, hey, you guys should stop by. He's not like really a self-promoter in that way. He just creates such interesting moments. And so he's done this like everywhere he goes. And I just find it fascinating to see how people, like, I love people who just like hack. They're like, they realize that there's like, the life is like, they're in on the joke of like the cosmos, you know, and they just like, they're not going to run their life like in a traditional way. So I'm always kind of fascinated by people like that.
I love that, man. I love that. I'm gonna research some of those people that you mentioned there. I want to touch on. We'll wrap up here soon, Ryan. But I want to touch on some of the mental fitness that you've addressed and that you use on a regular basis. Because I'm always curious how people operate. You know, what are their habits? What are their daily routines? What are things that they're doing on a regular basis to take their lifestyle and their business and everything to the next level? So, what's kind of top of mind for you for mental fitness these days?
I mean, it's just been the most rewarding thing I've invested my energy into, has been better understanding my relationship with my mind and my, you know, my emotional state. And instead of that, you know, I've basically been able to reduce my reactivity, been able to be more kind of creative in how I approach my relationships. You know, perhaps my mom says something, you know, that she said to me before that's frustrating to me, you know, how's the business going? Maybe that triggers me, or maybe, you know, because she's really asking like a loaded question, and I've been able to develop much less reactivity and much greater skill, you know, like in that instance, you know, instead of just like arguing with her about, you know, whatever she's trying to get at, I could just give her a hug or change the subject and see if she minds, or, you know, or just answer like with, you know, a gentleness instead of a combative nature. Even if I feel like I've answered the question 10 times, you know, in the last month. And I can just be much more, you know, aware and adept at like, you know, at handling myself. So those kinds of things have been just enormously valuable to me.
How are you training yourself to control that reactive behavior?
So step one is developing just awareness, right? So we all have awareness, but it's like under nurtured, and we under nurture this kind of muscle. So I will, like, anytime I see something red, I'll check in and notice, how do my feet feel on the ground? Is there a breeze in the air from the air conditioning unit? Is there, you know, what's the color of the light in the room? You know, is it yellow from the sun? Is it white from the overhead lights? And from there, I then have agency. I take back control of the moment instead of just automatically just going along and being reactive to the moment. I can kind of choose, oh yeah, maybe I'll take a deep breath right now. Maybe I'll smile. I'll force a smile. Maybe I will, you know, imagine something kind of goofy and silly in this moment to kind of cheer me up. Maybe I'll listen to music, like, oh, I just noticed that there's no fun music in the room. I wonder if this experience would be more, you know, richer with music. And then, so I'm basically developing awareness, and then I'm experimenting.
Okay.
And and I'm also taking notice of patterns. You know, maybe, you know, I felt racy this morning, and, you know, maybe tomorrow I won't drink coffee and see if I feel racy and see if that feels better. Or maybe the raciness was beneficial because it helped me get a lot done, and I'm gonna be okay with feeling racy for a few hours. Maybe I feel, you know, kind of, there's moments of the day where I'll feel scarce, where I'm like, I feel like nothing's working. I don't have any clever ideas. I don't have a lot of energy to get my to-do list done. And either I can just be okay with that and realize that, hey, that's a feeling I feel every few hours. And it's cool. I'm just going to wait an hour because it usually passes.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to feel anxiety about it because I know that I'm going to have faith that this too will end. Or I might, go for a run and like see if that makes the difference I'm looking for. And so I'm basically like, combining awareness, noticing patterns, and interventions through experimentation.
I was listening to, do you know who Andrew Huberman is? Have you ever heard of him?
I don't think so.
I think he's the top neuroscientist at Stanford right now. He was on a couple podcasts recently, and he was talking about that exact same thing. So when you see red, and just like you did, one of the best things you can do for the brain is take your focus off whatever triggered you, and look at the wall and look at your feet underground or something like that, because that'll just trick the brain and say, oh, whatever I was focused on isn't really as important as whatever came up for me, whatever triggered me. And it's just telling the brain, like, turn your focus onto something else, because if you continue to focus on that, that'll inflate the red, right, to make it much more, that anger much more stronger.
Yeah, and you can develop empathy. Like my example of my mom, what she's really saying is like, I worry about you. I
Hmm.
want to make sure that you're doing, you're not suffering from financial anxiety with your business. Um, and And so, rather than reacting and arguing, like a lot of the things we're reacting to are on the surface, but there's something deeper there. And
Hmm.
so I could just give her a hug and reassure her that my worrying mom, hey, I'm good. I love you. I'm doing great. And rather than answering the thing that I thought she's kind of poking at, she's really saying this other thing. And so, like, I think as I've developed more awareness and more skill, I'm noticing much more of what's below the surface.
Yeah.
Maybe my wife, is frustrated about something, and I notice like, oh, actually, she's actually hungry, and like I just need to get her a snack,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
I just need to give her space. Like I'm annoying to her right now, and I could just like leave the room and
Yeah.
come back in 10 minutes because she's overwhelmed with work, and like I'm pushing her to give me an answer to like where are we going to go this weekend,
Yeah.
and I'm just choosing bad timing. Like I should wait and pick a time when she's like relaxing.
Yeah.
And so I just all these things that I was just missing, I was just like out of tune with when I
Yeah.
was like less aware and less skillful.
I have a little mind trick like that too. When somebody does something that either annoys me or triggers me, I always tell myself either their dog died, or they're constipated. And then I'm like, okay, they're constipated. I'm okay. This is not a big deal. um,
I love that. Yeah.
yeah, but you mentioned, is financial stress something that comes up for you or has come up for you over the years? Because we deal with a lot of entrepreneurs either in our masterminds or just, through conferences. And I'm shocked sometimes you've got these people that seem like they've got it all together, have a 7, 8 figure business, very successful, but quite often they're challenged a lot with financial stress, keeping the business afloat, and this sort of thing. Is this something that you've been challenged or working on over the years for yourself?
Yeah, it's like one of the biggest giants for me to, transcend over my career has
Hmm.
just been this like enormous pressure to provide for my future family, for my, maintain my lifestyle, keep up with my upgrading of my lifestyle,
Hmm.
and actually, I think the part of my mind that's so good at business is that I optimize a lot of things very quickly and naturally. But because of that, I also will like if I get into like outdoor furniture for my new home, I'll like overly optimize and I'll get to know all the differences. And then before you know it, I'll pay for an unnecessarily expensive couch because now I went and sat on 3 of them, and I know that the one at XYZ store is just a lot softer and plusher and nicer and looks better, and like I wish, frankly, I didn't know the difference. And so I think one mistake I've made in my career is I've upgraded my lifestyle
Hmm.
as I've upgraded my income. And so I've been like, kind of on like this like rat race wheel of like trying to keep up with the spending. And one thing, if I could go back in time, I would do better is I would more gradually upgrade my lifestyle, so that it was like I could kind of like prolong, you know, it's good to keep looking forward to like, maybe when I'm 60, I could own like that thing. Like I don't need to own it at 30.
Yeah.
And he who has little is little owned. So that's been one thing. And then I think one thing I did do well though is like I was mentioning earlier, like the way I structured my capital and I structured my goals, I allowed them to happen very kind of gradually
Mm-hmm.
and growing our businesses. And it's amazing the power of compounding over time. If you just like make small incremental improvements each day, in your skill set and your network and your wealth, like they just compound like crazy. And like I think a lot of like overnight successes, they're almost always like if you study them, like they've been around for I think usually 7 years is like it seems like the
At
magic
least.
number. Like
Yeah.
usually 10, 12 years even.
Yeah.
And so if you could just like, I wish I could tell my younger self, like, just go even slower. Don't freak out about like if you grow 10% a year, that like, it's amazing how much that'll grow over time.
Yeah.
Um, and, just try to make, I tried to make everything kind of profitable kind of quickly so that I wasn't under the gun of like, investors and things of that nature. So those are some things I did well and some things I didn't do so well.
Yeah, that makes sense. I love that, man. Okay, I think we're going to wrap up there, Ryan. Any final words you'd like to give the listeners before we wrap up?
Well, I just want to keep spreading the word that it's just not that serious, like the stuff that comes up for us.
Uh-huh.
I think my mantra has been like, silly is the way.
I like
Like if
that.
you can inject a little humor and self-deprecation into your life, you can dissolve your sense of self that is kind of always wrapping itself around things and obsessing, and I love to just think like it's just like take a deep breath. It's just not that serious, like, and so I'll leave you with that.
I love that, man. Ryan, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Thanks for sharing the story of Summit and Bisnow and all the stories and tidbits you gave with us. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Listeners, oh, also, you guys, one more thing. If you want to learn more about Ryan, go to ryanbegelman.com and sign up for his newsletter. If you're interested in having Ryan invest in your company, if you have over $300,000 more in profit, he buys some of those, and you can follow him on Twitter. What's your handle, Ryan, on Twitter?
I think it's just at Ryan Begelman,
Perfect.
Begelman.
Perfect. Perfect. And again, thank you so much for coming on the show. Listeners, thank you guys for tuning in once again, and we'll see you all in the next episode. Goodbye, everybody.